Hello, welcome back. You've made it all the way to lesson 9. Yep, Genesis 7. That's where we're at. And we're going to find out about the flood and Noah and all that good stuff. Today I'm going to read from the complete Jewish version because it has a little different wording and I think it's kind of important. It's relevant. Highly recommend you check out a couple of different versions when you study the Bible because that will help you with the different translations see a little different word structure that will help you understand a little bit more too. I like the Bible app. You can look at two different versions at the same time, side by side, and see the different wording. So let's jump into Genesis chapter 7 in the complete Jewish Bible. It says, Adonai said to Noach. Now, Noach is Noah's name in Hebrew. Adonai is what they called God. In your version, in most versions, most translations, at least newer ones, have changed Adonai to Lord because we took out God's formal name and put in the Lord, so it'd be more focused on Jesus, less focus on God. We'll get into that, I know, but I promise that's what happened. We'll figure it out. So, chapter 7. Adonai said to Noah, Come into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone in this generation are righteous before me. Of every clean animal you are to take 7 couples, and of the animals that are not clean, 1 couple. Also of the birds in the air take 7 couples in order to preserve their species throughout the earth. For in 7 more days I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. I will wipe out every living thing that I have made from the face of the earth. Noach did all that Adonai ordered him to do. Noach was 600 years old when the water flooded the earth. Noach went into the ark with his sons, his wife, his sons' wives, because of the floodwaters. Of clean animals, of animals that are not clean, of birds, and of everything that creeps the ground, couples, male and female, went into Noach in the ark as God had ordered Noach. And that's an important distinction because it says, it gives the impression that Noah got all of these animals into the ark. And what it literally says is they went into him. God, in some supernatural way, commanded them to go to Noah. After 7 days, the water flooded the earth. On the 17th day of the 2nd month of the 600th year of Noah's life, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of the sky were open. It rained on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On that same day, Noah entered the ark with Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, Noach's wife, and 3 wives of his son accompanying him. They and every animal of every species, all the livestock of every species, every animal that creeps on the ground of every species, and every bird of every species, all sorts of winged creatures. They went into Noach in the ark, couples from every kind of living thing that breathes. Those that entered went in, male and female, from every kind of living being as God had ordered him, and Adonai shut him inside. It's another thing. God shuts the door. That's a big deal. The flood was 40 days on the earth. The water grew higher and higher, so that it was lifted up off the earth. The water overflowed the earth and grew deeper until the ark floated on the surface of the water. The water overpowered the earth mightily. All the high mountains under the entire sky were covered. The water covered the mountains by more than 22.5 feet. All living beings that moved on the earth perished. Birds, livestock, and other animals, insects, and every human being, everything in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life. Whatever was on dry land died. He wiped out every living thing on the surface of the ground, not only human beings, but livestock, creeping animals, and birds in the air. They were wiped out from the earth. Only Noah was left, along with those who were with him in the ark. The water held power over the earth for 150 days. Talk about learning patience. Now, the key to this is Noah had to act. He had to do something. He couldn't just be fearful of the flood or think about what God had told him or pray about it. He had to act. He had to actually do something. And the really cool thing about it is God has prepared a final ark for us, Jesus. He is the final ark we're all going to get to leave in. So it's taught that, in the New Testament, that grace is really just a New Testament concept, that it didn't really exist in the Old Testament, but it did. It was just like the New Testament. It was done the same way in the Old Testament. God granted Abraham righteousness. He didn't earn it. He called Noah righteous. He didn't have to do something to gain that. Abraham trusted God, and so God considered that a reason enough to give him the designation as righteous. Hebrews didn't really think in terms of working their way to heaven. That wasn't a thing. We've kind of been taught that they're very law and works oriented, but they're really not. Heaven was not a goal. It was living with God, living now with God. And what happened with Abraham being considered righteous and designated that, and Noah, is that's exactly how it works with us. When we trust in Christ, Jesus, then God grants us righteousness. He observes us as righteous because of Jesus, because we trust in him. The law was never a salvation document. That was never what it was intended for. From the beginning all the way through Revelation, grace has always been the way for a right relationship with God. None of that's changed. We may have presented it as changed because of Jesus, but it's really not changed. It is done in the same way. So we'll see that as we kind of move along. Now, only some animals came in a single pair, and others came in 7 pairs. 14 animals, 14 of each clean animal, but only 2 each of the unclean animals. That'll matter. We'll get there. For us, food is what we can eat. Like I can eat paper. But for a Hebrew, anything that's not kosher, that's not ordained by God to be food, they don't consider food. That's the way I feel about like lima beans. Technically, people think they're food, but they're really not. It says in Deuteronomy, don't eat anything disgusting. So don't eat lima beans. But food is only what God has designated as food. People don't designate things as food to the Hebrews. That was a Hebrew concept. Should be that way with us, but we'll get into that later too. So ritually unclean meat is not forbidden food. It's not food at all. It's just ritually unclean meat. It was never food for them in their minds. Because we have to remember the Bible is a Hebrew document written in Hebrew context by Hebrews. So prior to the flood, animals weren't even considered food at all. Prior to the flood, clean and unclean meant animals that God had told them were suitable for sacrifice. Didn't have anything to do with food. It was just for the sacrifice. So in the future, God's people are going to be removed by our heavenly ark, Yeshua. That's Jesus's real name. We call him Jesus. That's an English word. English wasn't invented for hundreds of years after he was on earth. He would have never been called Jesus. He certainly wouldn't have been called Jesus Christ. His name is Yeshua. The reason we call him Jesus Christ is because there's not a translation for the anointed one. So we call him Jesus Christ, and it really should be Jesus the Christ. And if you have the ESV, the English Standard Version, and then some I think the New King James Version, they're starting to add in the between Jesus and Christ. So if you've ever wondered, why do people, when they get mad, they say, Jesus Christ? That's not his full name. He was never called that in his lifetime. It's really Jesus the Christ, the anointed one. So that's a sidebar, but we'll get there, I promise. So then they get into the ark, and there's a 7-day pause. Can you imagine? You're in this ark for 7 days, and you start to wonder, did we make the right decision? Was it really God telling us to do all this stuff, or did we come up with it on our own? Is Noah crazy? We'll have to see. I'm not sure we can imagine what must have been going on through their heads and their minds with people screaming outside the ark, and there wasn't anything they could do. It was too late. So that's a concept we don't hear a lot about. But after the number 7, 40 is the second most used number in the Bible. In America, we don't really put a lot of weight on numbers and what they call gematria, which is the study of numbers. But in the Hebrew context, it meant something. 40 was used throughout the Bible, usually during a trial of testing or probation. Here's just a few of them. It rained for 40 days, another 40 days until the mountains appeared. Jacob was embalmed for 40 days. Moses was on Sinai without food for 40 days. Jesus fasted out in the wilderness for 40 days. The 12 spies in Canaan did their job for 40 days. Nineveh was granted 40 days of repentance to avoid obliteration. 40 days is the purification time period required of a new mother. Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. Moses led Israel in the wilderness for 40 years. Kings David and Solomon each ruled for 40 years. Moses was 120 years old when he died, 3 times 40. So 40 is very dominant in the Bible, and we're going to look at each one of those as we kind of go along. But it was not just rain, too. It was the fountains of the great deep burst up, and water started coming up out of the ground. Underground caverns poured out onto the surface. No one had ever seen anything like this before. And they were inside the ark, so they weren't even really sure, I think, of what's going on. So they started questioning Moses. He may have come up with a bad idea, but doesn't really tell us any of those things. But verse 11 gives us the date the flood began. Since the beginning of the Hebrew year was originally in the fall, it was likely that the flood began in November. That's not real relevant, but it will come along as we go through the calendar of feast and those kind of things. So, and God physically closed the door. What I love about that concept is, just like Jesus, our only job is to accept it. Moses' only job was to get in, and then God took care of all the rest. It's a pretty big deal. But this gives us the pattern that God follows. They don't change. He has very clear patterns throughout the Bible. And in order to understand the Bible, we have to not ask why. We need to ask what's the pattern. Look for the pattern, because we won't always find out why. It's very rarely ever answered in the Bible what why is. So that's a very important biblical concept when you're studying, is look for patterns. Now, verse 21 gives us the broad categories of everything that perished. It says all basar, flesh, animals, mankind died, in addition to birds and swarming things, mice, rats, stuff like that. But it didn't include fish or sea creatures, because in verse 22, the original Hebrew says all that had the breath of life died. The neshama, the life spirit, is what died. Plants don't have neshama. They don't have the spirit inside of them. So if it lived on dry land, it died. If it required an extended period of time on land, it died. Fish and other aquatic animals probably lived. Any amphibian that needed to be on land for a long period of time may have died. It depends on how long they had to live there. But the rain lasted for 40 days and 40 nights, but the water kept increasing for 150 days. Even after the rain stopped, the only life, the only nefeshma, living beings are in the ark. So this is going to get really exciting. So think about 150 days. Today is almost the beginning of April, I guess. So you figure there's been about 90 days. So think about being on a boat, floating around with all these animals and all your family for about twice that, and not really knowing what's going to happen. So next week, we'll jump into Genesis 8. Don't forget to hit that share and subscribe button to make sure you get these when they're released. And we'll talk to you soon. God bless.